should be around.
Okay, so let me know.
Scott's going to do it when you guys do the ChatGPT thing on Wednesday, since I'm not here, so he's going to run that. So he could run it.
That one's going to be like, we're going to be discussing.
I know.
So I think the stream.
We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
I'm interested to hear it, but I'm not going to be
Yeah,
here. So.
I mean, I have like, Grant and I have like 70 slides, and then we're going to just kind of
We'll figure out how it works. I mean, maybe he can move the camera and get the. You're good to go.
All right, that's good. Let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you to I believe our final colloquium of the semester, and it's a special one because it is a PhD defense seminar of Andi Muttaqin, who will be presenting on his work on land-atmosphere interactions over the Indonesian Maritime Continent. And it's my pleasure as his advisor to get to introduce. Andy joined my lab in 2019, but he's actually had quite a career even before he joined here. He got his bachelor's degree in applied meteorology in 2011 in the geophysics and meteorology department at Bogor Agricultural University in Indonesia. There he actually wrote a thesis on utilization of numerical weather prediction model outputs for short-range weather forecasting with a case study from Indonesia. So he already had pegged himself as a meteorological researcher, I think, early on. He went on to get a master's degree in 2015 in atmospheric sciences at the Madden-Julian Institute of Technology in Indonesia, and that was on the spatial structure of identification of tropospheric biennial oscillation index implementation for the Indo-Pacific region. Shortly after that, you were hired as a faculty staff in the agroclimatology department at this University of Gajah Mada, which I cannot pronounce. And you could, how do you pronounce it, please?
Universitas Gajah Mada.
Universitas Gajah Mada. Okay. And while serving there, he actually served as an investigator on several research grants related to climate change impacts to fisheries and phytoplankton dynamics and agricultural climate adaptation. So by the time he reached out to me, he emailed me on February 6, 2018, never delete your email, and he was already a seasoned researcher. This is what he wrote in that email. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Andi Muttaqin. I'm a faculty staff in the Department of Soil Science. I'm very much interested in pursuing a PhD in your group. Concerning land-atmosphere interactions, I'm a hardworking person and have ability to work as a team member. This is very true. Andi is an incredibly hard worker. Every time I meet with him, it blows my mind. Comes with organized multi-page documents about what his plans are for the week. Here's the best part. That email included an 11-slide PowerPoint of what his research plans were. And here's the title of that PowerPoint. And I want you to look at this slide. Land-atmosphere interaction over the Maritime Continent. That's pretty impressive. A lot of PhD applicants who know already the title of their dissertation. In fact, in those slides, he talked a lot about the role of soil moisture as a driving variable for land atmospheric effects. And I think we'll learn a little bit about how and where within a couple of different factors that may have a factor. So Andi applied for a Fulbright scholarship, and that's how he was awarded and applied to join our program for the PhD in fall 2019. Arrived here on August 23rd. I have an email from them where you're like, I'm arrived and I'm really tired and jet lagged. And also a little bit heartbroken too, as he had left his infant daughter and spouse behind in Indonesia. We were able to finally bring them over to next year, and they're in the back here watching. And now you're 4, right? Which is also pretty impressive. And then also exciting as well is that Andi will be wrapping up over the next month or so, and then he will be returning to Indonesia, where he will be returning as faculty member, but now with a PhD in a civil service position on the tenure track at the same university, Universitas Gajah Mada. So I'm looking forward to all sorts of great things coming from you after we complete this journey here. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle, for the kind introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here. Also, I would like to greet families, friends, and colleagues who are attending these presentations from Indonesia through the live stream. At this time, there is 3:30 early in the morning, Tuesday, yeah. So I am excited to be here today to present my PhD research on land atmosphere interactions over the Indonesia Maritime Continent. We will also discuss some implications of these interactions on climate and agriculture over the region. Let's take a quick look at the roadmaps of today's presentations. In this talk, I will have three main sections here. We will begin with the discussion discussing the driving force behind this research, including the study area, which is the Maritime Continent, and the research problems over there, and also some research questions that I posed. Then we will take a dive in the research and finding sections. In my PhD research, I have three titles, three chapters. In this talk, I will spend more time on the land-atmosphere interactions, on Madden-Julian Oscillations, propagations over the Maritime Continent. And then we will also briefly touch on the sea breeze circulations and monsoons. In the final sections, I will have conclusions, implications, and future works. And at the end of the presentations, we will have questions. With this roadmap in mind, let's take a dive into the motivations. So this is the study area, the Maritime Continent. And for some of you, this term might be not really familiar. So I will try to break down this into some definitions. So maritime means connected to sea or oceans. And continent means continuous land. But as you can see there are no continuous land over the Maritime Continent. In this case, the word continent is used to emphasize the numerous amount of islands. Do you know how much islands over there? This is over 22,000 islands, small and big there. So that's so many. So combine these both terms, Maritime Continent, we can define as widespread islands connected by shallow seas and flanked by oceans. To the west of the Maritime Continent, we have Indian Oceans, and to the east, we have Pacific Oceans. In these particular regions, the word Maritime Continent also consists of parts of Southeast Asia, parts of Indonesian islands, and then the Philippines, and the New Guinea. In this research, we will focus mostly on the Indonesia Maritime Continent. And the research is the effect of land-atmosphere interactions over these regions on MGO, sea breeze, circulations, and monsoon. So after we know already the Maritime Continent, now we move on to the importance of the Maritime Continent, global importance and local importance. So the term Maritime Continent first appeared on a paper published more than 50 years ago, on 1986, by Dr. Colin Stockbridge. And the term Maritime Continent is on the title also. The title of the paper is Role of a Tropical Maritime Continent in the Atmospheric Circulations. In this paper, Ramage highlights the global importance of Maritime Continent on the global climate. So the figure here on the right basically or simply show us that Indonesia has released significant amount of energy that affect extratropical regions. So the figure there, basically the tropical belt, South America, Africa, Indonesia, and the dashed line is the mass of water vapor representing the latent heat energy. That's from the global context. Now, from the local context, the unique combinations of land, oceans, and atmosphere there shape multi-scale variability. We will talk about this right after this slide. And this affecting 400 more millions of inhabitants over there. And some of multi-scale weather systems can lead into floods, drought, even crop failures. So we already talked a little bit about multi-scale. Now we dive in about the multi-scale variabilities over these regions. We have like 4 different time scale of variability affecting these regions. The first one is the interannual variability. It means year-to-year variations of climate that significantly affect the Maritime Continent. We already know that there is ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillations, that operates over the Pacific Oceans, significantly affect the Maritime Continent. Also, Indian Ocean dipole over the Indian Ocean basin. And these interannual variations mostly comes from the interactions between oceans and atmosphere, like the difference of sea surface temperature. And then moving to the shorter time scale, to the seasonal scale, we have monsoon here. Indonesia Maritime Continent affected by mostly the Australian monsoon. During the monsoon active over the Australia, some parts of the Indonesia getting the wet season. And it actually affected by Indian monsoon by drifting all the water vapor to the Indian continent, the Indian regions, and make these regions dry. So wet season, dry season. And then going to the shorter time scale, we have intraseasonal variability. For the intraseasonal variability, we can think about 1 to 3 months of the frequency, and it's called Madden-Julian Oscillation. And the last one, we have like diurnal variations due to the differential heating between land and oceans that drives the local circulations, the sea breeze circulations, which also affect the Maritime Continent because we can see that there is a lot of coastal regions there. So with those different scales of variability, we have a different scale of challenges. And I limit to the 3 scales here, from diurnal to seasonal. And this is the matrix of the time scale and problems and also hints. And as I said before, I will discuss more on the intraseasonal variability. And what is actually the problems of the intraseasonal variability here? So the Maritime Continent frequently block the propagations of Madden-Julian Oscillations. We will talk about this later, about the MJO. What is MJO? And after literature review, literature research, I found that some hints, including land versus oceanic convections. So I will focus on the land sections here. And just to touch the diurnal and seasonal sessions here, diurnal variability here. So from the diurnal perspective, the problems here, the climate models cannot reproduce the observed diurnal cycle. And the timing actually, the timing still missed. And for the seasonal, there are challenges on the monsoon onset. We will touch about this after mainly discuss about the intraseasonal oscillations. So this is the research questions that I posed. The similar theme applied to 3 time scales. The question is, how do land surface properties over the Maritime Continent, first, how it influences the propagations of the Madden-Julian Oscillations. And the second, how it modifies the strength of sea breeze circulations. And the last one, how it modulates the monsoon onset variations. we already going through the first sections. We have the second section here, the research and findings. So as I said before, I will introduce to you about the Madden-Julian oscillations in case you are not familiar with this. If you ask me how to describe MJO in a simple sentence, I will say that MJO is a weather pattern that moves eastward and bring clouds and heavy rainfall and also wind along the tropics. If you want to have like mental image of these definitions, here the sketch I think perfectly illustrated the MJO. So we already know that this is Maritime Continent, north of Australia. And the MJO itself mostly initiated over the Indian Oceans and moved eastward and going through the Maritime Continent. The problem is the Maritime Continent often block this propagation and just decease over here. And this particular chapter assesses the potentials of land surface properties on this behavior of MJO over the Maritime Continent. So, talking about the methods, the MJO itself can have two, at least can have two conditions here. The first one, this arrow represents the center of the precipitations that move eastward. So in this case, the MJO passed through the Maritime Continent without any problem. But the thing is, it should interact with the Maritime Continent for the MJO cross case. And for the second case, the MJO just dissipated right over the Maritime Continent. So why these two conditions discussed here? These two conditions discussed here to assess the effect of land surface properties over the Maritime Continent, whether it is allowing the MJO to going through the Maritime Continent or blocking the MJO. We compare land surface conditions using ERA5 land for 20 years. And for that 20 years, we see each of the MJO events that passing through these regions. Just to summarize, the results of the 20 years of MJO, we have around 200 of MJO for 20 years. And from that 200, we try to find these two conditions. So the MJO is monitor or track the positions using several indexes. But the MJO index that we use here, it's called large scale precipitations tracking, or LPT. LPT can pinpoint the center of the MJO at every single time, if we have the data set at every single time. So the figure above there is what I said before. We have almost 200 events of MJO, and this is the cumulative or the composite picture of the MJO over 20 years. As you can see, MJO life cycle mostly over the Indo-Pacific regions, means from Indian Oceans to West Pacific Ocean, West Pacific. It's almost around 85%. And for single tracking of NGO, we can see from the bottom illustration there, this method, the LPT from Kearns and Chen 2020, can follow along the propagations of MGO. Also, the intensity of MGO. If you see carefully, the circle there is getting bigger and getting smaller. In this case, MGO is blocked by the Maritime Continent. On the other case, it can pass through there, through the Pacific Oceans, or can be deterred to the north or deterred to the south. So the basic thing here is to exclude any MGO that deters around because it is not interacted with MC land masses. We only interested to see MGO that interacted with MC land masses, and is it block or is it cross? Actually, I have another illustrations, but very slow on the slide. So here are the results of the classifications. If you remember the first two figures that classifying MGO cross and MGO block, this is the real results of the classifications. The MGO cross on the panel A here, as you can see, the circle here is the initiations of the MGO, and the cross is the dissipations of MGO. And from 200 samples, from almost 200 samples, we got only 15. For the MGO block, it's larger than that. It's almost 40, 39. So we also can find, using the algorithm to classify this, the MGO detour. The MGO detour means that the initial locations is the same, Indian Oceans, the dissipations locations is the same, Pacific Oceans, but it's not really interacting with the Maritime Continent. You might see that this is interactive, but if you see individual track, it sometimes only visit Maritime Continent for 1 or 2 days, and then it goes out. Or it's just going through the ocean part of the Maritime Continent, not really interacting with the landmass. So the MGO detour is excluded. Again, this will ensure that the MGO cross and MGO block reflect the influence of land-atmosphere interactions on MGO propagations. So we already on the last slide of the MGO chapter here, which talk about key findings of the effect of land-atmosphere interactions on MGO propagation. Okay. So again, this study assessed the effect of land surface properties on MGO propagations, and the method is large-scale precipitation tracking. And the land surface properties is the surface temperature of these islands, and also surface soil moisture of these islands. So this figure is the MGO cross minus MGO block. Means that this the land surface data here is composited, is average for the events of MGO that cross, and the other group is for the MGO that block, and average, and then subtract it to get this figure. This figure means that to have MGO cross, we should have
surface temperature anomaly higher in around these regions. I know this is also higher, but remember that my focus is on the Indonesian part of Maritime Continent. So you can see that over here might be the keys of the land surface temperatures that make the MJO can be propagated. So this is for surface temperature anomaly. How about the surface moisture, surface soil moisture? So the surface soil moisture shows that to have MJO cross, these regions should have a drier soil moisture. So combined together, the warmer surface temperature and drier surface temperature over these particular regions tends to precede MJO cross. We can also change the logic here to have MJO block. This is just the opposite way of this. So for the MJO to get blocked here, the surface temperature over here should be cooler than normal or wetter than normal. So that's the key findings of the first chapter, the effect of land atmospheric interactions on MJO propagations. Now we will be briefly highlight the sea breeze circulation chapter. The research question is similar, as you may remember, how land surface properties over the maritime continent affect the sea breeze circulations. So this is only one slide for one chapter because it's only brief highlight. So we're going through from this figure first. So sea breeze circulations over the maritime continent is identified using the difference of land surface temperature and ocean's temperature on certain coastal regions. So if you pinpoint, for example, here, for the coastal region here, the algorithm will take the surface temperature over the land and surface temperature over the oceans and making some difference. And it's got the delta T here. And the data set that extracted for these calculations is using the afternoon data sets to get the sea breeze circulations. And we compare this surface temperature difference with surface wind speed. The idea is if the difference between land surface and ocean's temperature is getting higher, the circulations will getting intense. So if it makes sense, we can say that over that particular coastal regions, it can say that over that regions there are signal of sea breeze circulations. I only showed this one out of more than 100s because we have a lot of points here. I'm just showing one example here. The other appearance of this graph on the other coastal regions might be different. It's like the other way, or making a weird shape. So I can only show this. I only show this the locations that make sense between the difference of temperatures and surface wind speed. And I identify that locations as locations that have sea breeze signals. On the figure there are bubble map graphs showing the sea breeze days for the 20 years. And it can tell us some locations over the maritime continent not really have sea breeze signals, and the other regions have a sea breeze signals. One may argue that over here it should be a sea breeze signal there, but the algorithm that I used to calculate this is avoiding excluding the large-scale effect. Over these regions, there are Indian Ocean dipole. And it seems that the calculations excluding the signals, because the sea breeze over there affected by larger circulation. So we have interesting finding here. See here that this is Java Island, where I live there in Indonesia. And this is Sumatra, this is Borneo. So we have signal over the southern part of Borneo, southern part of Sumatra, and over the most part of Java. If we go back to the MGO propagations and see these particular locations, we might see some collocations between the signals of MGO and the sea breeze. Also, we hypothesize that the sea breeze signals also affect the propagations of MGO, but it's still for the future work. So that's all for the sea breeze circulations, the brief highlight. This is also the brief highlight, only one slide for the third chapter, which is the effect of land-atmosphere interactions over the maritime continent on monsoon onset. The onset itself is defined as the days when the wet season started over the regions. So if farmers announce by the government that certain day is the onset of the monsoon or onset of the rainy seasons, they will start thinking to when to plant the crops over the regions. So that's the simple definitions of onset. And this study investigates the possible effect of pre-onset land surface conditions, in this case 2 weeks before the onset happens, the land surface, how the land surface properties can affect the onset variations. The onset itself can be delayed or can be early. And we calculate the onset using IMER GPM over 20 years. And actually a lot of formula to calculate the onset, and the formula that I use here is like this. The number of days after August 1 when accumulated rainfall exceed 200 millimeters. And this particular amount is the amount of moisture needed by the crop establishments. So now, we can see the figure there. The x-axis over there is clearly showing the years. So this is interannual variations of the onset. And for the y-axis is the onset anomaly. 0 in the horizontal line here means the mean onset over 20 years. In this case, I show you as an example is over the west or central Java. The mean onset over 20 years from 2000 to 2022 is on October 22nd. And this onset can be delayed or can be early depending on the large-scale variability or other factors. The interesting point here is that, so the red here is delayed onset, the blue here is the early onset. Earlier than October 22nd, this is later than October 22nd. And this is number of days. The interesting part of this is you can see that the extreme early onset or extreme delay onset, it can reach 60 days or 2 months. The early onset can be 2 months earlier, or the delay onset can be 1 month later. And if we make a horizontal line here showing the 15 days, this is early 15 days, this is late 15 days, we can see that outside of this region, if you can check the years, it's affected by El Nino. El Nino mostly delay the onset. La Nina mostly make the onset earlier, or Indian Ocean dipole. So we can observe here that the onset variations for more than 2 weeks mostly affected by large-scale climate variability, and so IOD. Then we also found that onset variations between here, for example, why this is have like variations there, why have variation here and there and here inside the 15 days threshold, we can see that there might be source from land surface conditions over the maritime continent. I'm not showing here because we will talk about this maybe in the discussion sections or questions. So 2 sections, domain sections already passed. This is the last big section from me, the conclusions part. So in conclusions, this research reveals the role of land surface properties in shaping the 3 different timescale of variability. So we can say that the land surface properties can shape the propagations of the Madden-Julian oscillations, because we already found that hotter or warmer land surface over Indonesia Maritime Continent and drier land surface over Indonesia Maritime Continent can alter the behavior of NGO propagation there. Can be passed through or can be blocked. And for the sea breeze circulations, we also saw that there are some part of the coast of the Maritime Continent which have the strong signal or weak signal over the Maritime Continent. And the last one, these land surface properties can also affect the variations of monsoon onset. And what about the implications of this research? I can have 2 points here. The first point regarding mostly the climate, and the second point regarding the agriculture. The first point here is that the findings on NGO chapter and sea breeze chapter suggest that accurate representations of land surface over the maritime continent is essential for improving regional climate modeling and weather forecasting. In this research, we did not involve any modeling, so it will be my future work. And the second point here, the monsoon chapter provide insight onto the factors that drive monsoon onset. We can see that onset delay or onset early that more than 2 weeks or early more than 2 weeks is mostly affected by the large scale, but inside of that threshold is most probably affected by the land conditions over the maritime continent. If you are interested about this onset, I can show you the figures, the results. And here's my future works. So building on the insight from this research, I plan to getting more involved with the research about the land-atmosphere interactions over the maritime continent. And I can summarize in 3 points that my future work will be including the techniques like remote sensing techniques and machine learning to better understand the land-atmosphere interactions. Also, combining these techniques into observations of land surface properties and fluxes. Currently, there are limited observations over the maritime continent. For the flux tower itself, maybe, I don't know, under 5 or under 3. So it will be my biggest dream to have like 0 observations on land surface properties and fluxes and incorporate this into the understanding of land atmosphere interactions over the regions. And the last one, applying this insight to benefit the agriculture, to the management of the agriculture, decision making, planning, ensuring more sustainable and productive of the regions. And please, I want to take time to thank everyone who have involved in this research. The first and the foremost is my advisor, Professor Ankur Desai. Thank you so much for the guidance, and also the committee members, Dr. Adames, Dr. Henderson, Professor Kucharik, Dr. Huang. Also, thanks to Ecometeorology Lab and AOS community as a whole. And then thank you so much for my wife there, and my daughter, and parents and families who always support me throughout the process. And I also want to acknowledge funding researchers here, funding sources. There is a Fulbright, Professor Desai grants and assistantship. Thank you so much. And also support from Universitas Gadjah Mada in Indonesia. So my WIS email will be expired in 1 year, maybe. So please to have a contact of my UGM email for later discussion. Thank you so much for your attention. That's all.
Time for sure for questions. In particular?
So for the MGO blocking, you compare the temperature for the ones that cross and didn't cross the Maritime Continent. Have you looked at the ocean properties, like just the ocean surface temperature?
Thank you for your questions. That's a good questions. And if I understand correctly, you asked about this particular results.
Yeah.
And did I involve the sea or oceans part of this? So this is actually intentional to make the analysis only on land surface properties and excluding the sea surface properties, because we will have like mixed signals over there if we combine. So yeah, for now, maybe we only see the land part. Maybe in the future, maybe we can involve both of the analysis. Thank you.
Very nice talk, Andy. I had two questions, one particular and like one more broader question. I was wondering, like here for the crossed versus blocked cases, did you also look at amount of rainfall over the Maritime Continent? Does that change between the two? And like more broadly, I was just wondering if you had physical hypothesis for like why drier conditions help the MGO propagate.
Okay. Thanks, Vijay, for the questions. Maybe I start with your last question first. Is it okay? So, the hypothesis for why the warmer and drier conditions over the Maritime Continent can affect the behavior might relate to one paper by Zhang and Li, 2017. In that paper mentions that to have NGO propagated, there are convections over oceans and convections over land, or the contrast of the convections that involve it there. So in this case, I will go back to that paper later. In this case, I hypothesize that over these regions, hotter land surface can increase the intensity of sea breeze. Increase the intensity of sea breeze means that convections over land will be outweigh the convections over the oceans. And it's matched with the paper that I mentioned, so that if the convections over ocean is suppressed, the MGO will be crossed. So that's the hypothesis of these warmer conditions. So it's basically related to the sea breeze circulations and the distributions of convections either over land or over oceans. And I think it's supported if I thought that way. And the first questions is, I'm sorry, can you remind me?
I was just wondering if you looked at rainfall rates.
Oh, rainfall rates, yeah, that's a good question. So I already have some extra slides here. Yeah, here. So this is the MGO block and cross. Across, so we can focus on this figure here. So the MGOB is colored red and MGOC is colored blue. And this is showing basically the seasonal variations over the Maritime Continent. It is not shown here, but if you can see the amount of precipitations, these particular months is the starting of the rainy seasons or monsoon onset and the activity of Australian monsoon that affect these regions' weather. So I think this also makes some bias on the calculations because some portions of the season here is the MGO most likely to be blocked. So that's the point. So maybe in the future to resolve this problem, I can separate between dry seasons and wet seasons and see the difference between MGO block and MGO cross. Maybe that's the answer. Is that answer your questions?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Hi, Andi. I'm just wondering how good is the monsoon forecasting right now for the onset, and like how much do you think you can improve it with your work?
Okay, thanks. So the monsoon onset right now, I'm not really following the predictions from the government because it has some difficulties. Like you have to open several pages to find where you are and when is the onset predicted over that regions. But we can say that the pattern of the monsoon onset is following some patterns. Like I can show you. I think I can provide here. Oh, here, yeah. So this is some sampling from the Maritime Continent, like South Sumatra on the west side, Borneo or Kalimantan, Central Java and Bali. So basically from the map perspective, it's going through from north, west to the southeast. And this is the onset date. And this is the average over 20 years. So we can see the range of the onset date, which is, for example, Central Java is around 22 October, as we talked earlier, and it has some range. So I think that the predictions, if it's still inside this range, is still acceptable. But I hope in the future, with involving this, the insight from this research, I can help to improve the quality of the predictions by involving some land surface properties that might not be involved previously. Thanks.
Anything else from the audience? Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I've been thinking a lot about your mechanism idea, because of course a piece of this is the drier side of it too. And I wonder if it's mostly just kind of a deeper, more convective boundary layer type of process, or I don't know to what extent that's driving that MJO convection, but it is kind of an interesting thought. I think we've been thinking a lot about potential mechanisms there.
Yeah, from the perspective of convections, sorry. It should be analyze more variables like PBL or planetary boundary layer to see the effect of this land surface properties affecting the boundary layer and then affecting the other dynamics. So yeah, I think I have to involve more variables to support that kind of hypothesis thinking over here.
Like a static stability or something like that. Very cool. If there's not any more questions, then let's thank Andy again for the presentation.